And also there's other textbooks like the the 72 techniques, of BA. So, but this is the minimum, that I would say you should try as much as possible to get this textbook if you want to do the exam. So everything that they're going to set in the BCS certification foundation exam that I'm going to share, so it's just based on this book. So as long as you can read this book and understand it, then you should be able to pass the foundation exam, because all the questions will still be around what is being mentioned in the book as well. And so for the certification, so definitely I would recommend that you get the certification. Is BCS Foundation. You can Google that online. And I'm sure for those going to internship, I'm sure probably maybe they'll share the link. But it's something that you can just Google it, then you'll be able to find information on it. So is at least at the minimum, just try to have this, because sometimes when you apply for a job and you have maybe several candidates, and sometimes they try as much as possible we have the same experience. Sometimes they may use the certification, to recruit, or maybe to take one candidate over the another, so it just gives you an advantage anyway, sometimes when you find yourself in that situation. So it's just good for you. It's objective, so it's good for you to have it. So I would recommend you do that. So if you can read its textbook, and within a few weeks, I'm sure you should be, if you understand what is in the textbook, definitely you should be able to take the exam, at least within a month, I would say, yeah. So let's go into the business analysis. So the first is, so what do we mean by business analysis? So we can say the business analysis is a practice or a discipline or a profession, that actually help to identify the business needs, and also to determine maybe any solution to the business problems. And it could be that, when you identify the business needs, definitely you have to recommend solutions to them as well. And so it's more or less like, for example, if you have, the organization, they have a need. So they may say, oh, we need a new business, we need maybe a new accounting system. So it may not necessarily that is that accounting system that is going to solve their problem, but they may say, okay, they need a new accounting system. So you still need that business to carry out the analysis to understand what the problem is. What are they trying to gain out of that system? What are they trying to achieve? What value will it deliver to that stakeholder? So the analysis, so it's just like business analysis. So analysis is trying to identify what exactly, the business needs, for them to be able to achieve their goal, to achieve the outcome, to achieve, or to deliver value to the organization. So you now carry out, so they employ a business analyst to help them, to carry out all those activities that are necessary, to analyze the problem, or, to analyze what exactly the business needs. So, and you can then recommend solutions to their problems. So it's not nutshell, it's just carrying out analysis for the business. So, and so then we say, who is a business analyst? So it's a business analyst that now, does all those things. So what you do is that, so as a business analyst, so what exactly do we do? So because if, for example, if we look at maybe an organization, they said they want to increase their turnover. So you have an organization that wants to increase their turnover, but how would they increase the turnover? So it could be is a project, or it could be that a vision or a mission statement of the organization. So that means they need to carry out some things for them to be able to, increase the turnover. So that means the value is the, to increase that turnover. Increasing the turnover is the value for the organization. So then how would they actually carry out, to get to that point, to get to that target state? So that means they need some people to, to do the analysis of what needs to be done. So because that means at the moment they have a problem that they're trying to solve. So the problem is that they are not, where they want to be. They have not reached that target state. So they need a business, they need people to be able to carry out analysis. How do we resolve the problem? How do we achieve our goal? So that means they need to carry out some work to identify what do we need to get to that target state. So for example, we can use, post office as well. So post office may say they want to reduce, like we know post office is the government, that deliver our letters and parcels. So they may say they want to reduce, time being spent, to deliver standard post. Maybe at the moment, the standard post is currently 5 days. It takes them 5 days to deliver to your doorstep. So now they may say they want to actually reduce that they want to reduce the time that it takes them to deliver, maybe to 3 days, from 5 days to 3 days. So that means that is the need. And what value? So that means for them to reduce that from 5 days to 3 days is actually going to, deliver value to post office, to the organization, for them to be able to say that anyway. But how would they, achieve that? So that means they need some people. So that means we have sort of like a problem at the moment, 5 to 3 days. How do we achieve that? So they need some set of people to come in, so that means they may set up sort of like a change team. We could call them a project team that will not help us, to achieve, our objectives. So and our objective is one, to reduce that duration, lead time from 5 days to 3 days. So that means we need to try and analyze, what needs to be done. So probably you may have to go in there to analyze what are the processes that it takes them, to even deliver the letter. Because you can't just say, oh, we want to reduce it to 3 days. You just need to increase maybe the staff that delivers letter. It may not necessarily solve the problem. So you need to understand the problem. So you need to help them identify what is causing the problem at the moment. What can aid, to achieve that 3 days. So that means you may have to look into the processes. You need to understand how things are being done at the moment. When a customer posts a letter, what are the processes, like the chain of activities that happen before it gets to our doorstep? So all those things, you need a business analyst to actually, try to do all those analysis of what, the transaction that takes place, the activities from the inception to when the letter gets posted to, or maybe delivered to your doorstep. So analysis of the business. So that is just in a nutshell, so that I don't really spend more time on that. So, and we say as a BA as well, you help with the requirement. So for example, when we say a requirement, that means it's the business user needs, is the need of the business. It could be that probably maybe they want to change, they need a change to the system. Maybe they need additional feature, maybe, in an existing system. It could be that probably maybe is a new product. So a requirement actually means a business need. So it could be anything. So we can say we have a requirement to build a new community library. We can say we have a requirement to build, to develop a new website. We can say we have a requirement to introduce a new system, a new regulation, a new policy. So that's what our requirement is. So a business analyst actually deals with the requirements. So it's like a core activity that we do. So we work with requirements of our user or stakeholder or the organization. And when you are doing this, so definitely, because the business analysts work on the change. So when we say the change, it could be that you don't even have anything at the moment. It could be that it probably maybe is a new system, a new stuff that you just want to introduce. And you work in a project. So I believe every one of us, we actually understand what the project is. Definitely is a series of tasks that you need to, that needs to be completed for you to actually achieve a specific outcome. So it could be, so definitely you have sort of like a start date and end date. So, and as a BA, so we serve as somebody that actually relates, with the business for us to understand what the business need, what they actually require, what they want to deliver. Then we are the one that will not translate that into what the technical people, the technology people, or the builders, or the people that is going to deal with those requirements, we will actually be the one intermediary between the business and the technical team. So sometimes, like for example, if it's sort of like a new system, maybe let's say IT system, technology system. So that means it's not, sometimes the business users, they may not really understand, what all those terminology jargons, IT jargons is, but you will be able to understand, speak with them in a plain language, understand what they need, trying to help them, because they may just say, oh, we need IT system, we need new accounting system. So, but it may be that the accounting system is not even going to solve their problem. So that's why they need your expertise to actually help them to understand what they need. Then you document that. Then you send that to them. You give that to the technology team, the technical team. It could be even a development or team within your organization. It could be probably maybe a supplier that is even outside your organization. So it's just like you are point of contact between the system and maybe the technology team, the technical team, or the IT team. So you have to like intermediary. And I always say a business analyst, we are sort of like a heartbeat of a project, because without the business analyst being carrying out their job properly, the project may fail. So imagine if you don't have a business analyst and the stakeholders, which we're still going to come in. So let's say the business users, and they just maybe call one of the organization, maybe let's say maybe SAP, and they said, oh, we need a SAP system. Can you deliver a SAP system for us? What is the cost? They give them the cost, the codes, and they pay the money, and they install SAP system, for the organization. So the SAP system may not actually help them to solve their problem. So because you've not even done any analysis to understand what they need, what features, what are the delivery. So it may just be, they just know that some people, maybe their competitors are using SAP and they just want to use SAP. So, but it may not really be fit for purpose for them. So that means, and there are some things that you have to carry out as a business analyst, that because you are specialized in that area, so definitely that normal person, or maybe normal staff, or other staff that is not non-BA profession, they may not be able to do it because they don't have that skills. So that's why I say BA is more like a heartbeat. If the BA is not there, the project may fail. And also sometimes, when you have a project team, and so you can't just say a project manager should come and document or carry out the activities of a BA, because that person is a project manager. So the person is not a BA, the person is not skilled in that area. There's a way I will ask the question that project manager will not ask the question like that, because I have the skill of a business analyst. Likewise, you cannot say a developer or a testing team or a software tester to come and, to gather the requirements from a business, and they're still going to be the one that is going to develop it. Because they may not ask the question, they are not skilled, except if the person is a BA or has been a BA in the past, and definitely the organization just feel, oh, let's employ this person, let's get this person, oh, the developer, can you gather the requirements and develop that code for us? But it doesn't work that way. That is not the right way to do it. So if somebody that is not trained as a BA is gathering requirements, that means it's likely that project will fail, because the person has not really carried out the necessary tasks, or may not carry out the necessary tasks, or may not even ask the right question. And when you don't ask the right question, when you don't really analyze the business needs, when you don't identify the problem, so that means at the end of the day, the organization may spend lots of money, to implement whatever the requirements that the developer or the tester or the project manager or any other role, or maybe even the business user themselves have documented. So they may not, after a while, they may even spend maybe thousands of pounds on it. And at the same time, maybe at the end of the project, it doesn't really meet their needs. It doesn't really solve their problem. So that means the waste of resources. So that means because if you have a poor requirement, definitely it will leave. It's just like garbage in, garbage out. If you don't do things properly, that means the end result will still be poor. So that's why a business analyst is a really key role. And even when you have a business analyst, if the person documents a wrong requirement, because there are some people that probably maybe they make mistake in gathering the requirements, if they don't document the requirements the proper way, definitely it may lead to loss of resources, waste of time and effort. So if the business analyst even makes mistake, definitely it will affect the whole project, because if the business analyst is the person that is actually kickstarting, that is actually providing the information, of what the developer or what the tester are going to, they are going to actually test. So everything starts from the BA. So whatever you feed into the developers, that's what they are going to develop. And that's what the tester are going to test as well. So, and they may not realize that is actually wrong. You've documented in the maybe wrong requirements until probably maybe when you start doing the demo to users, and they'll be like, no, that's not what we wanted. No, we didn't say we wanted that. We actually said we wanted 24 by 12. And you've made a mistake writing 24 by 5. So that means everything, time wasted, resources, money, and everything. So that means BA, that's why I always say BA is a critical role. So, and everything starts from it. So without the BA, you can't really function on the project properly, because if they don't do their work well, it will affect everybody down the line. It will affect the developers, it will affect the tester, it will even the person managing the project will even fail as well. So that's just BA, so that we don't really get into it. So, and I hope, so like the project, you may be involved in a project whereby it could be probably change of technology. It could be that probably maybe they just want to look into skills, into people. It could be about processing, re-engineering of the processes. It could be about probably maybe introducing a new system. So as a BA, you do various, you can work on the various things. So not just maybe IT, tech, maybe IT team. So it may just be they want you to look into processes or to look into skills and capacity as well. So that's in summary, so that's BA. And so if you have a question that is there any restriction in the industry, I would say no. As long as that they are delivering projects, in that organization. And like I said, there's some organization that probably maybe they're small firm, and probably they don't really do much, they may not want to employ people. They may say, okay, their staff will document their requirements, but there's possibility that they may not really get it right, because you need somebody that will actually specialize in that role to help you, analyze your need, to help you understand your problem, then to be able to recommend solutions to you. So, and for as a BA, you can work in bank, you can work in any financial sector, you can work in any government, sector, you can work in manufacturing company, you can work in construction, you can work in healthcare, you can work in, I'm trying to see, I can't really, you can work in, retail industry. I'm still trying to think the industry that as a BA that I can really work. I can, because like if you say, for example, let's say Arrows. So definitely Arrows also, because they actually deliver services, they have some projects they want to do. They may want to increase the sales. They may want to introduce new system. They want to revamp their websites. So they need a BA to actually help them gather the requirements. So likewise in a manufacturing company, so it could be even if it's what's it called, BMW, all these cars and the people, or the Indus Volvos and Volkswagens like that, Audi, that actually manufacture cars, you still need a BA to be able to work, to be able to spec it out. So they may say they want to introduce maybe a new series or a new brand of BMW. So you still need to understand. So it's the BA that will actually document what exactly do we want to build, what kind of car. Is it going to have maybe 6 headlights, or is it going to have windscreen, things like that? How many doors? Is it going to be hatchback? Is it going to be sports car? All those things are still requirements. Their specification, anything that has to do with specification that you are building, spec on. So definitely you still need a BA. And likewise in health industry, you need a BA, as long as it's not necessary even when they are using system. So it could even be, let's say they are manufacturing, let's say plastic or notebook. So what do we want to manufacture now? So they may say, okay, we want to manufacture a new product, let's say a new book. So, but what type of book do we want to manufacture? Is it like a notebook? Is it like a notepad? Is it like a, pocket note, or what do they call it? Or is this sort of like a A4 size? Is it like a B3? Is it something, or is it like a notebook with lines? All those things, how many pages is it going to be? All those things are requirements. So you need a BA to be able to spec all those things out, to be able to ask you the right questions. Then that will actually help, to be able to spec or and build the right thing, or develop the right thing, or manufacture the right thing. So I would say there's no restriction on the industry. So you can work in any industry, as long as they have a project team and they want to enable change, they want to do something. Definitely, I would say there's no restriction on the industry. And so, like I say, BA is a vital in every project, in every change you want to, you want to make, because it's the BA that actually determines the success of a project, to be honest. Because if there's a gap in the requirements, it will have impact on your BA. So now, do you need IT knowledge? Well, you just need minimum, I would say, because if you, as long as you can use the system, you can document, you can type, you know how to use your computer, to be honest, I would say that's all you need. And you can use, like basic application like Microsoft Word, Excel. And although we have some tools that we do use, but it's something that you can, to be honest, you can learn hours, not even a full day. You can learn it within hours. So I've taught people in the past, and within even 30 minutes, 1 hour, you can learn some of those tools. Very easy to learn. Although the only reason why sometimes you may have, if you have IT background, although it may really help you as well, it will give you advantage, but that does not mean that if you don't have an IT background that you can't work as a BA, because in the past, even we have people that either maybe first degree accounting, or maybe a nurse, or law. Law does not even have anything to do with IT, but as long as you can use computer, so I would say you can practice as a BA. So, but the only thing, sometimes when you come across some projects, for example, if you're working on a new accounting system, let's say the organization wants to, or financial industry. So if you have an accounting background, or maybe finance background, definitely it gives you edge, because sometimes they may be saying on ledger, somebody, sometimes you may not even know what ledger is. If you're not from accounting background, you may not really know what general ledger is. And sometimes you may be working on a project that involves all those, maybe there is a financial, system, and you have to come across all those general ledger, things like that. So somebody that has that background will have an idea, because the person will pick it up easily. That does not mean that if you don't have an accounting background, you can work on such projects. It's just that it may take time, because you just need to say, okay, can you tell me what the general ledger is, for them to now explain it to you. But there's no crime, because you still need to ask questions if you don't understand anything. Or maybe if you're working on a security, let's say computer security project. So somebody that has maybe networking background, or maybe computing background, or security background, definitely all this terminology when they're saying penetration testing, or vulnerabilities, or router, or switches, access nodes, all those things, you pick it up easily because you are familiar with all those terminologies. So, but that does still not mean that you cannot if you don't even have that maybe computing or networking background. So it's just give you an advantage, better advantage. That's just the only thing. And that's that on that. And so as a BA, so for you to be able to practice as a BA, you need some certain skills. At least at the minimum, there are some essential skills that you need. You need to be able to, you must be a good listener. Because if you're working with, when you meet your stakeholders and you are trying to, they are giving you the requirements, you need to be able to understand it. You need to be able to understand what they're saying. You need to be able to listen properly, because, a user may be saying, oh, I want the system to be able to, or the system to respond or maybe 3 seconds after submitting, or the form to display minimum of or maximum of 3 seconds. That 3 seconds, you need to include it, because the person that means if the form does not respond to the user request, within that 3 seconds, that means when they are doing the testing of that system, it's failed. Because if I click on a form and it doesn't display for me until maybe about 7 seconds, that means it doesn't really fit for purpose. It doesn't meet the requirements, because the requirements that the user has specified to you is 3 seconds. It should respond within 3 seconds. So that means everything you need to be able to, document appropriately. So, and you need to be a good communicator as well, because there's no way you can, if you don't like communicating with people, interacting with people, I'm sorry, BA is not for the person. But anyone can, as long as you can talk to people, to be honest, is easy. You just need to be able to, because for you to be able to gather your requirements, to understand, what the problem they're trying to solve, what their businesses are, you need to communicate, by your email, or maybe by telephone, or face-to-face. You need to be able to communicate with people. You cannot do without it. So that means you need to be, you need to be excellent communicator, at least, have a way of, to be able to communicate with people. So I would say that. And also you need to be able to have a good facilitation skill, because when you are, you are gathering your requirements, sometimes you may need to have a workshop, and you need to facilitate. So you need to be able to facilitate the workshop, to actually say, okay, this is what we are discussing. This is, to be able to control that, to coordinate that. So facilitation skill is one of the key keys as well. And like I said, you need to be a team player, because as a BA, you can't just work alone. BA, you work in a team. You work with your project manager or your scrum master, or you work with your developers, you work with a tester. You always work in a team, because because BA, you can't just be alone, because if you write the documents, who are you going to deliver it? Or who is managing the project? Somebody needs to be managing the project. It will be the product owner, be it the scrum master, be it the project manager, somebody, you still be in a team. So you have to have that team spirit. And sometimes for you to identify your stakeholder, it could be that your team members will have to help you with that. They may have to give you all those information to say, okay, this person is a stakeholder, can you reach out to that person? And also attention to detail is one of the critical, skills as well. You need to be, like I said, you need to pay attention to every detail that the customer gives to you, every. So it's just like if somebody is saying, oh, we want the website background, the home page to be light blue or to be indigo, color. You need to document that in your requirement to say the home page of the website has to be indigo color. So because you can't just say the home page, the website needs to have home page or it has to be blue. It has to be the specific color, the exact color that the customer has specified to you. If they're saying they want the report, to be delivered to be generated every day, every 9 a.m. work day or maybe weekday. So that means you need to specify that to say every 9 a.m. On a weekday, every weekdays, or maybe maybe Monday to Friday. Anyhow, you are going to put that in writing. You just need to specify that. That means your user is expecting a report to be generated to their mailbox or wherever they have indicated. Then that report needs to be there by 9 a.m. It can be there 8:45, 8:55, but it has to be there by 9 a.m. Monday, Tuesday, every Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, they have to receive that report. So you can't just say, oh, the system must generate a report. So you have to be specific. So that means that attention to detail is very, very important so that you'll be able to understand what they're saying. So you don't omit anything they say that, oh, just a report has to be generated. No, it has to be according to how they want it. Because sometimes it will be, they may give you all sorts of criteria. So you need to ensure that you actually document it appropriately. And your stakeholder management is also key, because you will be liaising with your stakeholder, because it's your stakeholder that will be giving you, some of your stakeholders will be giving you the information. So if you don't manage them properly, definitely it will impact your work. You may not really get what you want from them. You may not be able to do your job appropriately. So you need to be able to manage your stakeholder properly. And also the documentation as well. So you need to, like I always say, because BA, it involves documentation. But the good thing is that a lot of organizations, they have this, they have templates. So all you just need to do is to try and, fit in all the information in the necessary place or just build up on it. So most times you don't start from scratch, like a clean slate, but you have a template that you just build up on it. You put the requirements into appropriate section. You put your process map into appropriate section. You just write in the background, maybe background information about that project. So that's the good thing about it. But it's something that you have to document. And also investigation, is also one of the skills that you need to be able to, you need to have. Because for you, because without the investigation, you can't even know, you will not be able to obtain your requirements, because it's your requirements, because how do you get your requirements is by investigating. So because you have various ways that you can get your requirements, so we say investigation, so that you be able to understand even what the problem they're having and the needs that they actually want as well. The value that they're trying to achieve as well is by investigating. So it's by asking, it's by trying to understand. So it's one of those skills that is where you need to be able to have an analytical and critical thinking. When you have information, they may give you some information. You need to have that to be able to reason beyond, that user. Because the user may say, okay, I need a report. Then you need to ask, why do you need the reports? What's the purpose of this report? Trying to understand the purpose, because sometimes they may just give you some information and it may not really necessary that it may not be useful. It may not even be relevant to the project. But you need to be able to, to actually dig further to understand, why they need that report, why they need the reports, and trying to, some people may say, oh, we need, something, we need a report so that we'll be able to, we'll be able to meet up with the target. But it could be that the report does not even have anything to do with the target. It doesn't. So you need to understand, all those information. Then you can easily say, okay, then you can play back that information. They will say, oh, okay, that's what we don't need it. But initially, they've told you that they actually need that in, but by probing, by asking them questions. So that's why you don't shy away from asking questions, because that's how you can carry out your job. That's why they need you there. That's why they employed it, to help them to investigate, to identify the problem, because they may not even know the problem. They may not even know what they need. So they need you to actually help them to do all those things. And modeling as well, you need to be able to have, so that's the tools, one of the tools, you model the processes, very easy to do. And yeah, so I think we can move on from here, if not help me spend more than necessary here. And so we can now say what are the roles and responsibility of a BA. As a BA, when you are assigned to a project, you need to first understand definitely the purpose of the project anyway. So assuming that you've been given the purpose, your mission or your objective or your deliverables. So, but how do you do it? So you need to identify your stakeholder. But how do you identify your stakeholder? Definitely, they will not expect you to just go and manufacture a stakeholder, but you get those information, from your team member, from the maybe project sponsor, from your project manager, from the product owner. They will give you all those information. And one thing is that by the time you start speaking with one stakeholder and followed by another, they will be giving you maybe additional stakeholder that, oh, you need to speak with finance team. They actually have a requirement because they will be using the system as well. If you speak with finance, they may give you additional stakeholder to say, oh, you need to speak with facility. They will be, like that. That means you will be getting, you'll be identifying more stakeholder as you work, on the projects, as you progress on the projects. And also you are responsible also for, to analyze your stakeholder. So there's a way you analyze the stakeholder, but definitely you still need information to be able to analyze them anyway. But with the help of your project manager, you can actually do this analysis, because your project manager will tell you, oh, this person is a project sponsor. We need to ensure that we make the person happy, we keep the person satisfied. Oh, head of the director of finance is a key stakeholder as well. Ensure that all the requirements are captured. All this information will be shared within your team. And when you're having team meeting, all those information, you'll be getting all the necessary information as well. And if you have sort of like a business change team or business change manager or business change lead within that project, the person is also responsible, to help you identify some of those stakeholders and also give you more information about your stakeholder as well. So like the investigation, I've mentioned about that. So you are responsible for investigating, to understand what's the requirements that you need to document, what the problem are, and also what the users needs, all those things, you are responsible for that. So when you say requirements elicitation, we mean requirements gathering, gathering the requirements from user is your core responsibility as well. So you are responsible to gather the requirements from the users, be it 30 users, you are responsible for that. And some projects, you maybe have like 2 or 3 BAs that will be working on it. So you just divide yourself and say, okay, I'll be looking into this work stream. This person will be looking into this work stream. So you have So you are responsible to elicit that requirement from the different stakeholders and also to document it. So you are responsible for that. And in terms of gap analysis as well, is one of your responsibilities as well to carry out the gap. And the documentation of those requirements, once you gather it, is also BA's responsibility. And validating those requirements to say, is this exactly what you want? Because once you document it, you validate those requirements. So it's still your responsibility as well. And also carrying out the user acceptance. You know, when all these requirements have been gathered and the products or the stuff has been implemented, and you want to, or maybe it has been designed or developed, and so for the customer to actually accept it, you are responsible for facilitating that user acceptance testing, you know, and because all the testing that the software tester must have done, so all those things will now be, so you will more or less like chair it to say, okay, because you are more or less at the customer face there to say you are representing the customer. So I need the tester needs to, or the developer needs to tell me that, okay, everything is now ready for testing, for user acceptance testing. So as a BA, I will work with my clients, with my customer, and to say, okay, you know, put some time in their calendar, arrange a session to say, okay, the product is ready to be tested. This is the time, you know, put in the time, whether you're going to use a meeting room, wherever you're going to have the demo, and you ensure that the customers are happy with what have been, you know, delivered or developed before they can now say, yes, we are happy, then they sign it off. So you are responsible to facilitate that user acceptance testing. So it's not that you are going to do it, but it's more or less the facilitation that you just need to do there. And then, yeah, so I think that's on that. So, and there are some keywords that you need to familiarize yourself with, you know, or as a BA. You know, sometimes when you go for an interview, you know, the interviewer will expect you to actually use some terminologies. You know, they may ask you, how do you prioritize your requirements? So if you're not familiar with, you know, all those keywords that we use, definitely the interviewer will know that, oh, this person has not done this thing before. So definitely when we say Moscow, that is what we use to prioritize our requirement. You know, like if we have 50 requirements, and we need to deliver a product within 30, let's say within 3 months. So there's possibility that we may not, all those 50 requirements will not fit that 3 months. And it could even be the budget as well, may not even be able to, you know, cater for, you know, for that, for all the 50 requirements. So what do we need to do? So when you are gathering your requirements, as you are gathering the requirements, at the same time, you will be asking, you know, your customer to say, oh, so this requirement that you're giving to me, you say you want the report to be generated every work day. So is it essential? Is it important? Do we have to? Is it something, or is just nice to have? So, and the person may say, oh, it's a must. We cannot do without it. So that means it's a must. So there are some requirements that is important, or is but they may not really need it now. So there's different from it's important, but we need it now. But there are some that are still essential, but it's just that we can still wait till maybe next phase. And there are some that is just, we just would like to have it if it's possible, you know. So all this Moscow is just used to prioritize our requirements. So that would actually help the developers, you know, to be able to, and the supplier to actually deliver what is or the most important stuff, you know. Then they will deal with it according to the priority. And then so we have what we call as is as well, and so which is this one. And so it means current, that is as it is now. So that's what it means, as it is now. It means current. So, you know, definitely they may say, what is the as is process, you know, So that means they're saying, what is the current process of the way of doing things now? So that's what it means. And we have to be means the future. So how we want to be carrying out the process, they may say to be process. So all these terminologies, you just need to ensure that you familiarize yourself with it. And because, like when we say elicitation, it means gathering. So it's just another word for gathering requirements. They may say elicit requirements, So if you're saying facilitate workshop, you wouldn't say organize workshop. Some people may say, no, in a layman, they may say organize workshop. But when we are talking in a BA community, we say facilitate workshop. It's just all these keywords, you just need to vocabularies, you just need to, familiarize yourself with all these all terms, keywords, so that at least when you are attending the interviewer will expect you to use some certain, vocabulary, regard that relates to BA. So like Moscow, you can't say what is more important. The requirements will be prioritized according to the importance. No, or to say what they are doing now. So we'll document the process of the way they are doing things now. No, we will say as is, we've documented their as is process, or maybe an idea could documented it to be process, things like that. So you just need to, different organization or maybe industry, they have their own terminologies that they use. So you just need to understand it. But when you are communicating with your stakeholder, your clients, your customer, you need to use common language, like the plain language. You can say, so instead of using as is, you need to use current. What are your current processes? What is your to-be process? How do you want the thing, the process? How do you want to carry out this process in future? How will you want to carry it out? So I will not use to-be process, because it's not everyone that actually understand what to-be process is, what we mean by to-be. Is not everybody. So you just need to understand that. So, and it's not everybody that will understand what you call user story. So those are the things that you just need to be mindful of. But when you are communicating, among your BA, among your community, in your community, you just need to ensure that you use appropriate language. So that's just so you just need to learn about this. But definitely, as you study, further in the training, definitely you'll be able to know the meaning for all this. So it's not all the keywords are not limited to these are just few. So because we can't fit in all the keywords into this, we can fit in. So these are just few keywords that I was able to put in there. And so now, when you identify your stakeholder, we've already said you've identified your stakeholder. So you need to be able to, to analyze the stakeholder. And when we say stakeholder, so it could be a party, it could be a person, it could be an organization, that has interest, in that project that you are doing, or in the outcome of what you are doing. So, and it could be that probably maybe it could either affect them, or they may be affected by that process. For example, if you have maybe in an organization and they have investors, you have employees. So definitely investors wants to make money. They may say, let's introduce a new technology, that will, maybe a robotics, or, things like that, that will actually, manufacture some things, faster, and maybe, for them to be able to dominate the markets. So definitely the investor is the stakeholder, is one of the stakeholder in this project. That means we want to roll out or maybe deliver so many products out there. It could be let's say plastic or something like that. And so investor is their stakeholder as well in this project. The employee is also working in the organization. They are also stakeholder. So the employee, one way or the other, they may be affected by these projects, but it could be negative. In this instance, it could be in a negative way. So it's not always be, somebody that has, interest, that really, that maybe that want to gain from that, to gain from that project. it could be that it will impact them negatively. But for the investor, it will bring more money for the investor because they will be rolling out quicker, and they will be, return on investments, will be high as well because they are producing a lot in a short time. So it could be, that will definitely, it will impact the investor in a positive way because they will be making more money. But in terms of the employees, it may affect them negatively because they may have to reduce the headcount because they may say, now that we have all these robots doing the work, why do we need 50 staff? We can just, have maybe 8 that will just be controlling or operating these robots. So the stakeholder, it could be somebody that is either affected or maybe affected. So, and it could be, the change may be positive or negative. So you just need to understand who your stakeholder. It could be the end user, it could be the director, it could be, it could be your project. For me as a BA as well, my project manager is also is one of my stakeholders. My product owner is also, if I'm working in Agile, so my product owner is also one of my stakeholders because I need to ensure, I keep the person satisfied as well. Because if the person has high interest, on my project or on the project that we are doing, and the person also, have, high influence on it as well, I need to ensure, that I manage the person, I keep the person happy, I'll update the person, things like that. So that's where we have this power grid. And you need to know this, learn this very easy, because if you are doing the BCS exam, definitely you do have this question. They may say, what will be they may give you this table, or it could even be in a sentence. They may say, if or maybe if your stakeholder analysis, and the person has low interest, this is the low interest, and high influence. So how will you manage the person? So that means you have to keep the person satisfied because the person has low interest, but the person could influence this in a bad way or in a positive way. So you have to keep the person satisfied. And I do say, even if the person does not have, maybe they have low interest or low power, say you don't have to ignore them. Although we have sometimes you see them saying you should ignore. You don't ignore, but you just monitor them. But it's just that you don't put all your effort in them really. You just need to try and monitor, what is being monitored then. So, but you don't ignore them totally. So I would say, and so because one way or the other as well, although they may not really be able to influence your project in a negative way because they don't even have that power, and because they don't even have interest. So you just need to master this table as well. You have that in the textbook. And it will also help you when you are doing your work as well. You'll be able to know your project sponsor. Definitely, the person has high interest because that's why the person is sponsoring the project in the first place. And the person also has high power to say, oh, I want to withdraw the fund, the resource. So you have to keep the person satisfied. So all those things. So you just need to be able to know who is high or has high influence, high power, low interest. But with the help of your project manager or the product owner, definitely you'll be able to analyze, or get all this necessary information. And so stakeholder involvement. So you have what we call stakeholder involvement. So like you have noticed that definitely we'll be talking about stakeholder. And so you have some stakeholders that probably maybe they are responsible for some of the things that, their involvement is like they have to do some things. So you see what we call asymmetries. Definitely your project manager, they usually have that anyway, the asymmetries. And as a BA as well, you can also have that as your home copy. Is not a deliverable that you need to share. It's just something that you need to have at hand as well, just for your own. So because there are some tags, and this relates to tags anyway. So because there are some tags that some people need to do, they are responsible for. to deliver, maybe to now, maybe that will aid your work. And it could be probably maybe, for example, if we are saying R, so it could be, I'm saying you may have a list of tasks that you have to do on that project. So, and, or maybe have people needs to do on the project. So we may now say, who is responsible for documenting the requirements? They will put documentation of requirements against the BA, that the BA is responsible for that. So they will put R. So that means BA needs to perform that task, needs to work, to complete that task. So when you're saying, so probably maybe managing the project is the responsibility of the project manager. So the R will be against, managing the project for the project manager. So it's just to identify who is doing what, and also their roles. So that's this, that's why we have this. And accountable, so, definitely for documenting a requirements, BA is responsible, but in that same task, the project manager will be accountable, because the project manager will be answerable to ensure that that particular task is being delivered by the BA. So you could have a task and different people will have different roles for it. And I could have maybe completely documenting the requirements. I'm the BA, I'm responsible for it. My project manager is accountable for it. I could have a support maybe from IT support team. Even I could, maybe I need to maybe consult, I need to consult maybe, let's say maybe one of the SMEs, the subject matter experts, to help me to understand some of those requirements. And it could be that I just need to inform some people about what we are doing. So you have different tasks like that. You could have like 30 tasks, on that project. And each task will have who is responsible for it, who is accountable. And there are some tasks that BA are not even involved. They are not accountable. They are not even supporting. They are not even consulting, and they are not informed. So you just need to know, who is doing what or what this actually means, so that at least you'll be able to, just in case when you find yourself, asking you about what RISI is, and support is what the person is supporting the responsible person. And consult could be the person just need to provide input to that task or maybe to that deliverable, but they are not the one doing it. Inform is just for their awareness. It's just to keep them up to date about the progress. So, but they are not doing the work. And so that's that on the race. So now, when I hope we'll be able to go through. So we've already said in terms of the investigation. So investigation is why do we investigate? So the reason why some of the reason why we investigate is that we want to be able to identify the area of concern, where we have the problem. We want to identify the weaknesses. We want to identify what the business needs. We want to be able to, document the requirements. We want to be able to understand the process of how they do things. We may want to understand, the problem with the current operations. We want to understand maybe additional features may be required, or maybe for an existing system. So there could be various reasons why, just those are just few, but it will, for me as a BA, to be able to, why we do the investigation is to be able to do all those things, so that at least that it will help me to document the necessary requirements and model the necessary business process. And so we have various, interview investigation techniques. We have the interview, which is, let me say, one of the most common interview techniques. So that is whereby we interview, one-on-one. It could be one person to two people. So you may have to just, meet with them. And there are various things that you need to do. Send them invites, agenda, things like that. So another investigation technique that is common is also workshop. And the workshop, you use the workshop, that's where we say we facilitate workshop. And the workshop is when you have so many people. It could be maybe from different business areas. So, you have, imagine we want to deliver a new system, and the new system, it will actually, accounts department will be using it, payroll will be, or let's say HR will be using it. Let's say IT team will also be using it. Sales will also be using this system. So we have about 4 different business areas that will be using this one system that we want to, or that have interest in this new system. So, but it could be that probably the people, the stakeholder we need to speak with, there may be, many that even in different maybe location. So how do we do it? So we can, say, okay, if we are, that means they have a common goal in a way. So we can say, okay, let's have a workshop to bring every one of them together. Then we can discuss it. So during the workshop, you may have like, maybe 30, depending on the numbers, and you can now start having workshop. It could be, so it's not just workshop like 1 hour. So because for you to be able to bring every one of them together, that means you have, a lot of things that you need to discuss. You may need to discuss the problems. Then you start asking them, could you tell us how, the problems that you're having? Then you start documenting it, you start capturing it. But there's a way we do the workshop, which was we'll discuss briefly in the next slide. So you have research as well, is another way of investigating. So sometimes the business, the customer, they may not even know, what they actually want. So they may just say, okay, we just need a new accounting system, but they don't even know what type of system they want. They don't even have much idea. So you have to go out, once you have an overview of what the project is all about, you start researching online, trying to have an idea. So, and once you have that idea, it will help you to now speak with your stakeholder to now start saying, oh, is this how you want it? Is this what you want? Is this then you start probing them with all this information. It will help you, to document all your requirements. So that's another technique. And questionnaire, we usually use that when you are dealing with sort of like a data, you want to capture data. So there are some times that, so there are some projects that you do that you may not be able to use, or maybe the research or the workshop will not fit. So you just have to, come up with a questionnaire, you send it to your stakeholders for them to complete, then you capture the information, then you start analyzing your results back. And there's also prototyping as well, whereby probably maybe you just mock up that solution. Sometimes when you are working on a reporting, so you use prototyping, because sometimes, imagine they want to develop a new report. So it's not easy, for them to say, okay, I want to capture data on it, I want to capture this on it. But if you have an idea, you can even come up with a sketch of maybe a sample report, then they can now build on it. They can say, oh, I don't want that. Can you move that to the left-hand side? That will actually help you. So that's more or less like a prototyping, sort of like, something that you can mock up, to help them, or it will help you to gather your requirements anyway. And shadowing also is another way of, investigating. So, like when you shadow that person to see how they are doing things, because it helps you sometimes to gain better understanding of what they are doing. And by doing that, you may even identify some of the problems that they don't even mention to you. Because they may be saying, they may not even, that's why I say sometimes they may not even give you all the necessary information. But by you shadowing them, you know that, oh, they're spending too much time, creating the invoice. So all those things, you capture it. They may not say it to you, but at least by seeing how they're doing things, then you can, get all the necessary information you actually need from them. So there are others, I think few other techniques that you can use anyway. So, but those are just the ones that we'll discuss today. And just to briefly look into your interview, because I know is actually one of the one that we do normally use most times. And so for you to do your interview, so let me say it's one of the most frequent investigation techniques that people do use anyway. And you need to understand or know who you need to speak with. You can't just come up with or just say you want to speak with just any stakeholder anyway. So you need to know who you need to speak with, because if you want to have an interview, you need to first identify who do I need to speak with. Then you need to know why you need to speak with them. Why are you speaking with the finance director? Is it because the person is the project sponsor? Is it because the person is going to block it? Is it because the person has an existing system? Is it because they have a system that will integrate with the new system? Or is it because they've done something similar in the past? You need to know why within yourself, why you need to speak with them. And also you need to actually have an idea of what you're going to discuss and when you want to discuss it and where. And all these things, I'm sure it will be covered in during the internship, and because there are a lot of things that needs to go into it. And what I do advise is that when you are doing your interview, always start your interview with the senior stakeholders, because it's the senior stakeholders that will actually help you to identify who you need to speak with. When you start with the most senior stakeholder, they will give you the context or the overview of the problem before moving into the detail, because they may not even know the detail, but because as a senior stakeholder, as the manager or as whoever the senior stakeholder is, they will know why they are doing that project anyway, because let's say the administrator or the end user may not really know the reason whether they even kicked off a project, they've initiated a project, but the senior stakeholder, they will know because they are the one that actually puts information together, feed that into maybe the necessary approval board to say, we need a project to do this, for it to be now kicked off. So you always start in your interview with your senior stakeholder, and they will help you, they will guide you to say, speak with this person. This is the administrator that actually uses the system day to day. The person will be able to tell you the problem that he or she encounters every time, or maybe how many times we do run the reports a week, how many, what's our pain points, those are the things that, it will help you. So that's why you always need to ensure you actually, speak with the senior stakeholder first, to get the necessary information, because you need a high level first before you go into the low level anyway. So they will be able to, they will determine, the level of detail and the questioning as well. And you have different stages of the interview, which definitely we are not going to go into today. And yeah, so like I said, if you are doing the interview, you have to plan the interview, you have to plan for your interview. And I do say to people, you can always plan ahead. You cannot put an invite into my diary to say you want to meet tomorrow. No way. You need to give me time in advance. You need to give me enough notice, and that's why I always say you need to always check their calendars. Definitely if you're working in an organization, they will have Outlook, that you can see their calendars. You can see whether the person is on leave, is on sick leave, is on maternity leave, or the person has even moved on or has left the organization. So you can check their calendars to be able to actually plan that. You understand? Always plan for your interview ahead. You understand? And you schedule it ahead of time. You check the availability, because sometimes some people, they will just put time in the calendar to say, without even checking whether that person has another meeting that time, that same time. So always check the calendar, because if you send me an invite, for a meeting and to attend a meeting, and to be honest, if I have a clash, I will just decline it. Although what I do is that I decline and I'll put a reason why I'm declining. Although some people will just decline to you straight. But if I were happen to be the BA, I will actually check the calendar first, check the availability of that person, and leave it. I don't do back to back. I won't even put interview or maybe meeting in someone's calendar, that has maybe about 5 hours, meeting on that day. I won't do that because you want their concentration, you need their attention. So you need all these skills to be able to, although it's normal thing that I do expect anyway. So, but you ensure that all those things are considered. So let's just put it that way. And also you need to be able, the duration of the interview, I would not expect you to have more than 1 hour interview. 1 hour is even too much. I know myself, I talked a lot anyway. So, but when I'm having an interview, I try as much as possible to do either 30 minutes or 45 minutes or maximum 1 hour. Even if we've not discussed or finished our discussion, what I will say is that I'll put in another time in the calendar, maybe for another day, then we'll continue the conversation. But I will not go beyond 1 hour, because the person will be bored, the person will be tired, the person will be, will need a drink or tea and things like that. So your interview also has a limit, so the duration. So you need to be aware of that. And also you have the location of the interview. You need to be able to consider that as well. And the structure of the interview, how do you want the interview to be, to go? So is it going to be question and answer? Have you provide, are you going to, do sort of like an opening, introduce yourself, set the scene, what you're trying to achieve, then you ask them the necessary question, you summarize the next steps, anything that is necessary. So you just need to structure all these things, before the interview. You need to consider all these things anyway. And once you conduct the interview, then you follow up with the interview. You send an email to say, oh, this is the next steps. Now that I've captured the requirements, or even if you need more time, you just say, oh, I'll put in more time in your calendar and we can meet again to continue our conversation. Or you can say, oh, I will follow up. So I will send, maybe I will go away and document all these requirements and I will share it with you in another 2 weeks' time. Just tell them, so that you just leave it like that, without closing it. So they need to know what happens to that interview, the information that that you gather from them, what's going to happen next. So then, because if somebody asks them and say, oh, I met with Abiola and she had an interview with me, and if the manager is asking that, so what is going to happen? Well, she didn't tell me. That's not professional. So the person needs to be able to say, oh, she said she's going to document it, and maybe she will send it across to us in 2 weeks' time. We can review it and let her know whether everything is appropriate, or maybe we need to add more requirements. All those things is something that you just need to ensure that you do as well. And so like the workshop as well. So the workshop, you have attendees, the people, that will attend, and you have your facilitator yourself. You're going to be the facilitator. Sometimes when you are in a big project and you may have two people, assigned to, you may have 2 BAs assigned to that project, and maybe one of you will be facilitating, another one will be doing some other stuff there. And when you are having a workshop, there are a few things, don't let me say so many things. There are some things that you need to put in place as well. In terms of the venue, you need to ensure you arrange that. And these days, definitely a lot of us are working remotely. So you do it on Teams. You don't even need to worry about the venue. All you just need to ensure is that, okay, that you put Teams there. And in terms of, if you're having to do it face-to-face, you have to ensure that you have your flip chart, your pen, your sticky notes, all those necessary things that needs to be in the meeting room or the venue that you're going to, you need to ensure that you have it available. But if you are doing it remotely, you have all the tools necessary online. You have your whiteboard that you can use on Teams. You have also some other collaboration tools that you can use, like Mora as well. You can use that. So that, is more easier now. So it's just that if you're doing face-to-face, you need to be able to know what you need to do, and also ensure that you put some things in place, like set the agenda ahead, meeting invites ahead. So, you send it out to the attendees as well, ahead of time, because it's going to involve a lot of people. So you can't just send set workshop for 3 days time. Now it's not. So I try as much as possible to do minimum of 5 days before that date, minimum, at the minimum. So it can even be 2 weeks before, it can be 3 weeks, depending. So it's just and your workshop, it could be 4 hours, it could be 5 hours. Because when you are doing the workshop, you want to try and ensure that you get all the necessary information you need from this group of people. So because you don't want to bring them back next week again or 2 weeks time again. So you want to ensure that they devote, maybe 4 hours or 5 hours of that, or, that day, to get all the necessary information. That's why you said it's a workshop. So they know that definitely that's why all those things needs to be planned ahead, and they are aware of the duration. They would have, considered their lunch time, bring their lunch pack, or maybe you're going to provide lunch, depending on the budget, all those things needs to be considered. So, but for your workshop, you can spend 2, 3, 4 hours, 5 hours, depending, but you just need to plan, break time in between us. So you just need to factor that in as well. And so for your workshop, you have, so many techniques that you can use as well, for your workshop. And for your workshop, you have post-it exercise. So which is, I'll just talk briefly on that because I know we don't have much time. So so as the previous slide, you could see that all those people were sitting down. So somebody may just say, so the facilitator will say, okay, right now, we are saying we need a new accounting system, or we want to change, the current accounting system that we have. Could we actually, or could you, each of you, take maybe the yellow sticky notes, post-it exercise in all this small paper? Could you take the yellow one and write the problem? We call it pain points. The pain points is problem. It's just like what is causing them pains, so problem. So let's just say, could you write the problem that you are facing with the current system? So each one of them, the attendees, they will take each of these, the yellow paper as instructed, they will write it on it. And one thing is that you have to let them know that they need to write each point per one sticky note. So if they have 5 problems, they should write it on 5 different sticky notes. 5 yellow sticky notes. So, and you can say, okay, could you put it at the back of the room? Maybe you would have created sort of like on the wall. You can say, put it on the wall at the back of the room, or you may have a board to say, let them put it on the wall, And you could say, once you finish, everyone will participate. They will write whatever they can write in there. And you could say, okay, now maybe you give them like 5 minutes to discuss that problem, to write it down. Then you move on to the next one to say, okay, could you now discuss about what do you want to see in the new system? What are the features that you want in the new system? You can do that again. You can say, okay, take the blue or the pink sticky notes and write your requirements or what you want, the feature that you want in the new system. They will do that again. You can say, okay, the benefits, what benefit do you think it will bring? Take the green one, all those stuff. You go through all that process like that. That's what we call post-it exercise, because they will be the one to write it, get up and stick it to where necessary, whether it's on the board, whether it's on the wall by themselves. So that's post-it exercise. And this is called brainstorming. So the brainstorming, as they were sitting down, that previous slide, so you just ask them to say, okay, we have, so we want to discuss about the pain points of the current system. Can we discuss that? Then people will start calling it out. They will start, saying, oh, is non-flexible, probably maybe very slow, they'll start saying all sorts of things, all their problems, they'll start shouting it out. Then you have to, if you are 2B, maybe one person will be writing and one person will be facilitating. So somebody will be writing it down. So that means they are not writing it down. They are just calling it out for you, and you are writing it down. And as you are writing it down, because all of them will be seeing it anyway. And even if it's online, it's still something that you can be typing it, you can be writing it, on the whiteboard, on your Teams, on your computer, they'll be seeing it. And as they're seeing it, other people also will be saying, it will juggle their brain, it will help them to say, oh yeah, this, they can be building up on each other, ideas of what they've already put in there. And it may not be new system, it could be for anything anyway. So that's just another way of getting information from the attendees. And you have what we call round robin. Round robin is when you ask them, turn by turn. It could be you are discussing a problem first, you want to discuss the need first, you want to, it could be anything. So that's round robin is just like taking turn by turn, instead of them anyone just shouting it out. So you just say they should take turn to say it out. And you have breakouts. Breakouts is when you break them into groups. You may say, okay, can you please form a group of 4? And so that means they will be in groups and they will discuss as groups. So they will collaborate together and, they will discuss among themselves that, what are our pain points? So you can say, okay, can each group write their pain points? So that means you are expecting them to collaborate together and do it as a group, discuss the problem, write the problems out, or it could even be the requirements, it could be, whatever you are discussing at that point, the points or the topic that you are discussing at that point, definitely they will just, work as a group. So that's the another way of getting the information. Then at the end of the day, everyone will report on it from their groups. Then you now start discussing it. You can now start expanding on it when everybody has submitted what they've written from their group. So it just helps them to collaborate together anyway. And we have what we call brainwriting. Is similar to brainstorming, but it's just that, each person needs to write down their own idea. Instead of, calling it out, you are writing it on the board or on the flip chart. So they are the one writing it down. They may put it in the middle of the table. And so then, definitely when they'll write one, everybody will put it in the middle of the table. You pick another paper from the middle of the table, maybe somebody else, what other person has written. By saying it, you build on it again, you go around like that. So it just helps that, everybody can build on what other people have written. So, but it's still about writing instead of shouting it out. Then later you can just all discuss about it. So, and you have, I think there's maybe 2 other techniques that you can maybe use, I know, but I didn't put it here. But these are the main ones that I know I do use anyway. And so there are various tools that you can use as a BA. And so like your MS Office, this Microsoft Visio is what you need to use to map your process map. I know there are some organizations, they have, some organizations have, they have different tools that they use, but at least in so many places that I've worked, we normally use Microsoft Visio anyway. So because it's Microsoft, and if the organization is using Microsoft environment, definitely they will use Microsoft Visio. So you use this to map your processes, and and sometimes you can use it to do your wireframing as well. And your Microsoft Word, normally we do, depending on the template that you have in the organization, you may have to document your requirements in Microsoft Word, and some do document the requirements in Excel as well. And also you write your acceptance criteria in Excel or in Microsoft Word, depending. And your user stories as well could be written in Excel. It could be written in Microsoft Word. And MS Teams is just your collaboration. So like I said, you can use it for your workshop, for your whiteboard. A lot of times, if I'm working remotely, I just use Microsoft Teams to facilitate my workshop and for the to collaborate with use the whiteboard on it to do my brainstorming session and all those post-its exercise. And also in terms of the collaboration tools as well, when you are working on the project, And definitely sometimes you have to put all these projects, all these tickets on the Jira. Depending on the organization, some organization they use Jira, some use Confluence, some use like where I'm working now. So we are using Jira and Confluence, and some do use Azure DevOps as well, and some do use Trello. Yes, I've used that in the past as well. And also Mora is also your is also one of the collaboration tool as well. It's good for brainstorming. You can have your sticky notes there. You can easily use to model your process, and also as well as the Miro as well. Is a whiteboard platform as well, so it's good for collaboration. And your wireframing, and for the wireframing, like sometimes when you're working on some projects, you can see you will see document the requirements, but the visual also helps. It gives more information, more understanding, to the developer. And sometimes the visual also helps, the customer as well to come up with their requirements. So for example, when you are developing a website, you need to have sort of like a wireframe in place. It's like a mock-up, to say how the website will look. Do we want to have blue background? So you can even demo that. You can just shade your wherever you are using. You can just even sometimes some people do use PowerPoint, to mock up a website. You can use your Visio to mock up it. These are all sorts of things that you can choose that you can use to mock up, sort of like any solution. So, for example, if it's a website, we can say, oh, I can just put sort of like a sketch something. And sometimes if you're having face-to-face, we can even sketch it on a paper and say, okay, and so this will be, the logo will be at the bottom right-hand side, or the contact us will be in the middle. So it's just that when the developer is seeing it and at the same time reading the requirements documents, it makes more sense. And because you can write, oh, we want the logo to be on the home page at the left-hand side, we want, or the right-hand side, we want the contact us to be in the middle, but does not really know exactly how you want it to look. So if you say left-hand side, yes, this could be left-hand side, this could be left-hand side, this could be left-hand side at the same time. So, and it could be that maybe the banner, so because some of this banner, so it could be the banner is the middle. How do we want it? Your wireframe helps you to give more information, especially when you are doing anything that has to do with digital projects. When I say digital project, something like a website, something like app, you are developing app, like you are developing a report, something visual, so something they can interact with. So all those things, reporting, it's good to always mock up as it's just to back up the requirements that you've written. So all these things as well, I think some of these are free. I think a lot, except in the Microsoft Visio, I know that one is not free. But I know Balsamiq is free. Lucid Chat also, I think you can see this, get some is free. So, but yeah, so it's just to, but at least at the minimum, just know how to use the Visio. That's when I said, to be honest, in less than a day, if you are very good, you will learn how to use it. So the more you practice, the more you get better on it. And so, and as a BA, you will see in some of the job spec, they will say you carry out the gap analysis. So when they're saying gap analysis, it's not rocket science. It's just they're saying, when you say, oh, the responsibility is to carry out gap analysis, or how do you carry out your gap analysis? What you are trying to do here is the process of comparing two things or two states together. So you are comparing your actual, let's say now, this is what they are doing at the moment or where they are at the moment. And they're saying they want to be here. They want to be at this future state, which is their target state. So now, how do we carry out the gap analysis? Now we want to identify the gap here. So how do you carry out this gap? So you need to be able to carry out some activities to be able to identify the gap here. So that's just gap analysis. So it's a process of comparing two things to determine the difference, between the actual, what you have now, which is the current, and the expected. So, and what is here? It could be that probably maybe it's the technology that is missing. It could be that maybe you're looking at skills. It could be processes, So it's just understanding, the difference between, where they are at the moment and where they want to be. So if it is a process, it could be, how do they process things now? How do they want to be processing things in future? So what is missing? Do we need to actually maybe increase the targets, maybe increase the runtime? Do we need to add more staff? It could be maybe a system is doing stuff, maybe producing, maybe they have a system that is doing some sort of functionalities there. And now they are saying they want to some functionalities there. So, but how do we fix this? What is the gap that we need? It could even be skills. It could be maybe you have to re-engineer the process. It could be probably maybe the process that can drain now. For example, if they say maybe this is 5 days, this is 5 days currently, and this is 3 days. They want to reduce that to 3 days. But 2 days, there's a gap here, which they have to reduce the 2 days. So what do they need to do? Maybe we need to actually, look into the processes. How do they run things now? Probably maybe we need to cut some stuff in there. But for you to be able to actually do that, you need to understand what exactly you need to analyze, the area. What exactly are you trying to achieve? What goals do you want to achieve? Then where do you want to be? What is the current state? Then you analyze it. Then you can now say, once you understand that, you can now say, okay, these are the gaps that I think we have at the moment. How do we bridge it? Then they will now say, these are the tasks that we want to do. These are the actions that we need to, that we need to actually carry out. Then for us to be able to bridge that gap, then that means once we identify the gap, so another set of actions or activities or projects will take place again to actually address the gap that you've identified. We can't cover this in detail, but that's just an overview of what gap analysis is. It's just a gap. So how do you analyze it? That's just it. And so as a BA, like you said, you need to be able to, your requirements gathering is let me say, is the core, of your activities as well. So because once you gather the requirement, you need to be able to document it, so, and we've talked about the requirement gathering, about, using your investigation techniques. So now you need to document it. And there are so many things that you need to do. You write your user stories, you write your acceptance criteria, your business process, you model it, which you use your Visio for as well. You write your use cases. Your use cases shows the interaction between, the system and the users as well. You use it to model your requirement. So, all these ones are even, different topics on its own that you need to really learn. But definitely your documentation is part of your work as well. And when you are looking at, the requirements documentation, so they won't expect you to do it, all these things that I'm saying, from the analysis to, your interview or whatever you're going to do. When you assign to a project, it's not something that you just do. They will say 2 weeks. Sometimes you may be on a project and you do all these activities maybe for 4 months, depending on the project plan, depending on how big the project is. And if you're working in agile environments, there are some certain tasks that you would do maybe per sprint. So don't be afraid that all these things are too much. No, because they won't expect you to turn yourself, to be working 24 hours. So it could be 6 months on the project. You could even be 1 year on that project, doing different activities like that. Sometimes if it's a waterfall, you could spend 1-2 months gathering your requirements, having workshops, having interviews before you now start documenting, before you now send it to supplier or IT team. Then another time for them to develop and do, then you'll be preparing for your user acceptance. Before you know it, it's maybe 5 months, 6 months. And if you're doing, even if it's agile, so definitely if it's 4 weeks agile or 2 weeks, for each of those, you just take it, bit by bit. So probably maybe you'll be looking into a section of finance, gather the requirements to that bit, because there will be, there will be a plan anyway, roadmap. So you have some certain activities that you need to do. So don't be afraid. Definitely, you have time for everything that you're going to do. So don't worry about that. So it's just that you just need to understand what needs to be done. So sometimes in agile, I've worked on a project before that I think I used about maybe 3 or 4 days to gather my requirements. It's just a section of the, maybe just 1 or 2 people within the finance team. Then I used about maybe 3 or 4 days to document it, or so 5 days. And 2 weeks, that's 2 weeks. It was a 2-week sprint. And yeah, and it's not maybe like, a law of requirements. So that's why you're doing it sprint by sprint. So that you don't just do everything at once. So you have set of activities that are going to do over, the period, maybe sprint 1 to sprint 11, depending on how big the project is. And so for your business process modeling, we call this one business process modeling. And you have what we call context diagram. You can use your Visio to do it. All these are modeling the business processes. And what do we mean by business process? Is, how the organization carry out their operation, like the series of actions, steps, or maybe procedure, that they carry out, to deliver a certain, service, or maybe production of a product. So you have different ones. So like this one, this is what we call swim lane. So the reason why they call it swim lane is just like, like a swimming pool. So, all this Olympic swimming pool that you have. So everything is a pool, and you have your lane. So that's why we call swim lanes. So England may be here, USA may be here. So likewise in the world, in the markets there, you have your marketing may be here, finance may be in one team, and then maybe HR, maybe facility. So it just shows interaction, hands off from one team to the other. So this is what we call swim lane. And this one is the use case diagram. So we call this actual, and these are use case. So what we use, so this also just shows the interaction, how you use it to model your requirements and how the user wants to interact with the system. And yeah, I think so. I don't want to go into detail because definitely it will take time. So like I said, this is just introduction. So for those doing the internship, definitely they will train you more during your internship. And yeah, I think that's all. So any question? Okay, I think we've got some question here. Some questions. Okay.